Welcome, everyone. I am Rabbi Michael Birnholz. I am in Vero Beach, Florida. So I'm on the east coast of Florida, and Vero Beach is the middle of nowhere between a lot of Jewish somewheres. So if you travel an hour south of here into the Palm Beaches, the Jewish population shoots up to 50 or more percent. Where I am, we are the only synagogue and Jewish community in our county of 125,000. Just also to kind of tell you, I am probably about 10 or 15 minutes at the most in heavy traffic, which means 3 cars at a traffic light from downtown, and 10 or 15 minutes from the Atlantic coast. So I'm in a very low density population area of Florida. We don't actually have any buildings in our county that are over 3 stories tall. So I am in a very suburban, rural kind of area. I actually live about a mile away from the synagogue. I'm actually sitting on the campus of Temple Beth Shalom now, and we live on an acre and a half, even closer to the center of town, just to kind of tell you this kind of quiet area I am. I'm also sitting outside, which it's Florida and it's October, which means it's still hot. We actually don't call it fall. We call it less hot. It is incredibly hot and humid, but I wanted to be able to do this session outside. So if you see me with bugs, and I know there has been a lot of discussion of bugs landing on speakers in the last 24 hours. I am braving the mosquitoes, gnats, and various other things. I am also sitting on a hill, but I'll explain why. So if you see me sliding around, it's just because I'm trying to make sure I don't fall over in the midst of this. I am sitting here because behind me is one of our sukkot. This is a sukkah. We actually put up the structure last year, but we've been experimenting with it. And on that sukkah are beans, pumpkins, and sweet potato vine growing on it, which has been an important part of the many garden projects that we have here at Temple Beth Shalom. And these garden projects really have 2 goals. One of it is, are there activities that we can do in the garden? Are there things we can plant in the garden that help us bring Judaism to life? And then are there acts of Judaism that help us understand our responsibilities for taking care of the earth? And we will actually see more of this. I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you. If you have questions, please feel free. They're in the chat. And a huge thank you to Eli, who is acting as the technical support from Hazon. And it's wonderful to have him helping me. And so if he sees something come up in the chat, that I invite him just to let me know. But I'm going to do a share screen because I want to share with you some of the various garden projects that we have here at Temple Beth Shalom on our campus. And as I show you all of this, realize that I have a challenge. I have a lot of really, really good ideas and sometimes not a whole lot of time to bring them about, or a lot of skills. I am a master garden volunteer, which I've learned a lot about the garden. I have a lot of chutzpah to plant things in the garden, but not necessarily a lot of success in the garden. I will say I'm more of a Job than a Jonah, and there's actually a Wall Street Journal article about me that was from 2014 of all my garden failures. I made it onto the front page of the Wall Street Journal for my garden failures. So sometimes I have a lot of challenges and more curses than blessings in the garden, but I keep trying. Less of a Jonah. I won't say, oh, that didn't work, and throw up my hands and give up. I just keep trying and experimenting, because each time I try and experiment, I am learning something. And I've noticed the community that gathers around the experiment, around the experience, is amazing. And that's why I'm excited to join with you this morning to be able to offer some of these different brainstorms and ideas of what I've done just last night. And I'm honored to be part of the Adamah at Home cohort that is working right now. Last night we did a program on pickling. And in just that hour, watching people start talking about how they wanted to work with sourdough, having people talk about how wonderful it was to pickle garlic, which I had never thought about doing. There was a discussion of making ginger bugs. Just a group of people saying, we're going to try pick. Some people had done a lot of lacto fermentation and some of the people had not. us just gathering and trying to talk about what Ashkenazim have pickled, what Sephardim, what Mizrahi Jews, what different places, talking about the vegetables that are local to our area, just having that moment where we were going to experiencing something together generated so much more energy going forward from that for people then taking it to their separate communities. That is what I'm hoping to offer to you this morning, both some of my ideas, but also to get that conversation growing about how do we bring the garden into our Jewish life, and then how do we take our Jewish life to take care of the garden. So I start with this text, and that is masculine gendered because of the sources where I found it, but please look past the language and those pieces of theology. I hope you will see the higher values of what I am offering. So from the student Chumash on Genesis, and we're actually coming up to these texts now. So the earth brought forth. Talmudic sage Rav Asi noted the apparent contradiction between this verse and the Torah's statement that nothing had grown prior to the creation of Adam, of the first human being. So we have in Genesis where it says all of the vegetation comes out in the statement of the days, but then when Adam comes onto the scene, nothing is grown until he appears. Rav Asi explains that the herbs began to grow on the third day as they were commanded, but stopped before they broke through the soil. It remained for Adam to pray for them, whereupon rain fell and the growth was completed. Another comment, Hashem God had not sent forth rain upon the earth. God had not sent rain because there was no human to work the soil, no one to recognize the utility of rain. But when Adam was created, he recognized it's important for the world. He prayed, rain fell, causing the trees and vegetation to spring forth. As noted above, plant life had already been created and was waiting just below the surface for Adam to pray. This demonstrates a basic article of faith. God provides what humans need, but it is up to humans to pray and otherwise carry out his responsibilities. And so I share that with you, with the idea being that all of these ideas are out there. All of these values are out there. How can we talk about them? How can we experiment with them? How can we brainstorm with them to then bring them forth? And some of it is going to be collaboration, and some of it is going to be someone has an idea that you're then able to share. My first one that I offer is a Latka Menorah. And so, and I notice a lot of cameras are turned off, but you're welcome to turn on cameras because I am curious of what exactly you all think a Latka Menorah might be. And you can take a guess from my picture of what a Latka Menorah might be. It might be delicious. Thank you, Asher. Brownie and meringue. So what you have here is definitely a brownie. And you can see, and there is meringue, but if you look below, and I'm hoping you can see my cursor, the flames, the base of the flames is actually made out of sweet potatoes. We took some sweet potatoes, we made them into little latke cups, and we made it into the part of the experience of a Latka Menorah. But there is a davar acher. There is another way to do a Latka Menorah. This is a Latka Menorah. Now you see one of the metal menorahs, and you might be able to, I'm hoping you can see there are LEDs that are lit up. And this is the fun of the Latka Menorah, and there's some wires. But why is this a Latka Menorah? Because this is just a menorah, and it's just lit with LEDs, right? Ta-da! Here's what's powering those LEDs. Potatoes. So yes, Sarah, you get some bonus points. There are potatoes powering this menorah. And so you can actually make a light using a potato. And so you hook it up and you can see there are pennies for the copper, there are nails, which are zinc, and there is a whole way of wiring up a potato in order to generate an electrical current. You can do this, by the way, with all kinds of different vegetables. And there is tremendous research. And of course, where are they doing a lot of this research? Israel is doing a lot of this research. What vegetable, what form? And they found that a roasted potato actually generates the most current for the longest period of time. And why are they doing this? Because in places where there are off the grid, in order to create light so people can live after sundown, people have to burn things, which creates pollution, which consumes, which creates all kinds of different issues. And so the researchers in Israel were saying, how do we create light with vegetables that it doesn't create the same kind of carbon and waste, generates light so people could read and experience life after dark? Why is this better for the environment? Because, oh, you've used up the potato. Well, you then can compost it. And so there's tremendous amounts of research that goes with this. And you can see my note that there are some websites with designs and concepts. By mixing the metaphor of Latka and Menorah, we have a way of seeing the energy we invest into an act of growing into the act of growing our food. So we have a potato that grows, and all of the energy of our act of gardening, we get to see it in the potato. By connecting it this way and creating a light, you can actually show, for me, for our young people in our religious school, but also for the older folks of our congregation as well, this energy that you have seen invested into the garden, here we're actually able to see the byproduct of it. And then you get to decide, are you going to take some of these potatoes and are you going to turn them into latkes? Do they go into your compost, or are you able to turn it into, there's a mosquito in my ear, are you then able to take it and pull pieces away that then get to be used for the seed potatoes for next year's harvest, for the next year's potato tower? And so I actually have sweet potatoes growing behind me. I will be very curious because I've never had potatoes growing in this kind of format before. I am going to be very curious around Hanukkah this year of what kind of produce that I have, whether it's for the latkes or for the menorah or for my Latka Menorahs. So that is Latka Menorahs. That is a way for me that I am saying here is a Jewish experience, the menorah and the latke, and is there a way to use the garden and the experience of the garden and all the things that I try to illustrate with the garden to bring it into the Jewish experience? The second thing that I want to show you is how do I use a piece of the garden to live out a Jewish value or illustrate a Jewish value. So this is a map I create of Jewish time that you have on one hand, you have the Garden of Eden in a state of Shalom. Adam is created in the garden. He is in a state of harmony, wholeness, and peace. Everything, the animals, the plants, is living in sync with each other and in balance with each other. All of the energy that is being consumed is being returned back into the system and loops over and over again. On the other side of that, we have Olam Haba, the world to come, which we think of as a Garden of Eden, a place where everything will be in sync, everything will be in balance and in harmony, wherever all of the energy that is consumed is then returned back into the system. It's a system in harmony and balance. In the middle, we have Olam Hazeh, this world that we are living in. Adam and Eve ate from the fruit, whole complicated discussion there that they end up leaving the garden into the brokenness of Olam Hazeh. And I also, the Isaac Luria's image of the Big Bang, that you have these vessels that are created, God's light emanates down into them, one of them shatters, spraying sparks and shards, and our goal is to do tikkun olam, to take those shards and repair the vessel, and to find God's holy sparks and renew them, and Judaism helps us move in time and place, syncing our lives with creation, and also finding those sparks and finding those shards and doing tikkun olam, doing those acts of balance. And so here is this map, this idea of there is shalom out there and we are in here. How do we get that shalom out there in here, and vice versa? As I say that, there are all kinds of ways to talk about the flow of Jewish time. And are we in the middle and there's stuff before us and stuff after, or are we on the outside looking at that perfect balance of harmony of things inside? It is coming into the time of Halloween and fall festivals. I did this the first time with pumpkins. I've moved on to melons, but I now have pumpkins growing behind me. And so I either call this the melon balls of Jewish time or the pumpkin seeds of Jewish time. I will fully admit the real goal of this was that I wanted a reason to be able to carve a pumpkin, take the seeds and roast it because I love pumpkin seeds. But as I said, wait, here is something I want to do with my garden. What is the Jewish value that I can use it to illustrate? And here you see this. a dor vador, a garden of dor vador, of generation to generation. There you can see me in an earlier iteration of life, eating from a melon. In the midst of eating from the melon, you then see to the right of that a picture of harvesting the seeds and planting the seeds and then composting what's left over. And so here I am in the midst of this experience, living in Jewish time. I'm eating the fruit here, but I'm taking the seeds and the compostable material, and the seeds are the future because they're the future plant, but they're also the past because they're the stored genetics. The compostable material is both the past and it's also the future because it's my soil for the next generation. And so here in this one of experience of whether it's eating from a melon, you can also see potatoes, onions, leeks, avocados, mangoes, and the list goes on. In the midst of eating this, can we have an experience of Jewish time, thinking about where we've come from, sitting and enjoying that moment, and also thinking about our future? And so here is an illustration of a Jewish value using the garden. Here are more different, all kinds of layers. I'm going to kind of go through them, a few different layers quite quickly because I'm curious both for some feedback, but also some of your brainstorms of different ways or different experiences that we would want to have with our garden, and how do we make that, turn that into a Jewish experience or find the Jewish experience of our garden. So here is an example of a rhythm or grogger garden. And I actually have some of the black-eyed peas that I have grown in this garden. Black-eyed peas are used by the Sephardim on Rosh Hashanah, but you can also make them into a grogger. I had a container. I ate some mints. I saved all of my mint containers, and then we used them for groggers where we're growing the beans in our congregational garden or some of our congregants at home to use for groggers for Purim. Instead of buying plastic groggers and metal groggers that are then breaking, how do we recycle? How do we reuse? How do we grow things in our garden? And I will tell you, young people, I've walked around with a seed pod before and I show them what's in the seed pod. They are blown away. They have no idea that that's where the beans come from. And it's ways of how do we open people's eyes? How do we experiment? I had never grown black-eyed peas before. I said, maybe I can do that in Florida. Lo and behold, I was able to do that. And so you can see here a hanging basket. I experiment with all kinds of different things. This is a vertical garden. Behind me, I have trellises that are growing. Last year didn't grow very well because I'm not sure of the soil. It's below some pine trees. And so I'm trying to grow in pots. You can see the pots that are back there where I'm growing controlling the soil a little bit better. And that came in handy. Last week we had 7 inches of rain. That was in the midst of a puddle. So that actually rescued some of my plants. Adonai Natan, Adonai Yikach, Yihisham Adonai Mevarach. God you give, God you take, praise be God's name. Here I am experimenting with beans and growing beans. In the midst of having beans for my groggers, in the midst of growing beans and peas that I could use as part of Rosh Hashanah, I'm also growing plants that are nitrogen fixers, or I'm growing cover crops. I'm finding ways of my garden to both take something from the garden, but also then give back to the garden. This was a story that really kept coming back to me of the battle against Amalek with Moses and Joshua. So Moses says to Joshua, pick some men for us, go out and do battle. Tomorrow we'll station myself at the top of the hill with a rod of God in hand. Joshua did as Moses told him and fought Amalek. With Moses and Aaron and Hur, they went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set. And so we used this text because I wanted to teach about trellising. And so here you can see, and everybody got one of these popsicle sticks. We wrote some different blessings and verses, and I created a trellis that we have. And this is in our 5 senses garden. So we have a garden that helps teach and helps experience all of the different 5 senses and how we bring them into the synagogue and into the community and spirituality into our lives. And there's some butterfly pea. And then the second picture is actually the butterfly pea. I took this morning, and you might be able to see there is one of these butterfly pea flowers that is there. And butterfly pea flowers are extraordinary because they are a natural food dye. You can actually use them as food coloring. You can put them in water, and if you add acid to it, it will change color. And so it's a great way of illustrating, and I'm still curious to see if I can actually use it to make something strong enough to be able to make techelet. We do grow cotton here on our campus in our Five Senses garden. It's actually just behind it. And you can kind of see it behind to the very right. You can actually see the cotton starting to grow. I actually grew up in Mississippi, and I feel like the two things I've actually had success growing in the garden is cotton and okra. I don't know if that's because I'm Mississippi or because that's what I'm growing here in Florida. That's my experience. But we use the cotton for our wicks that we use for our olive oil lamps on Shabbat. I haven't been using candles for Shabbat. I use the cotton as part of the wick, and we just use olive oil, and it seems to make a lot less waste growing on. We do have olive trees here. I have not been successful in getting olives to come off the olive trees. One day we would hope to be able to have our own olive oil here. And it's just part of those different experiences. How do I have produce from our garden that we can then use to teach different experiences or different moments of Jewish life? And actually, I want to go back for just a second. Here is some companion growing. These are some nasturtiums growing below some soybeans that we've been starting to harvest around. How are those ways, going back to the text with Moses and Joshua, that we can grow plants to support and help each other? And it's just brainstorming, looking for different ways of, wait, there are companion crops. Is there a way to use that to teach Jewish values, or the Jewish values of planting companion crops? And you might see a note here of Ezer Kenegdo. Again, that idea of Adam and a helpmate, that Adam and Eve were in partnership with each other, lifting each other up. Or do we envision ourselves as a helpmate for taking care of our garden, taking care of the earth? Here's some pictures of my Five Senses gardens, and this would be one of my biggest lessons. I try and I try and I try again. Again, I'm more of a Job than a Jonah. I have had lots of failures, but I keep trying. But Jonah sat there and said, oh, look, this gourd is dying. God, why are you doing this to me? And I keep learning. Rather than that, I'm saying, here is something that worked. Here is something that didn't work. How can I continue to learn? How can I continue to gather community around me so that we can be more successful in growing things? This was a spiral garden that suited us for many years. There's actually aloe in the garden that was next to it that is still part of our Five Senses garden. A chicken soup garden. This is one of my favorites. Not to grow the chickens, although I would love to be able to have chickens more for the eggs than for the meat. But how can we grow some root vegetables? How can I grow carrots or parsnips or daikon radish or leeks or parsnip? How can I grow those kinds of things, even if it's one carrot or one stalk of celery or one head of a piece of dill, to add to it so I can have chicken soup that I make or my community makes, that says we've invested something. We're not just going out and consuming, but part of what we are sharing with people that we care about with chicken soup is an act of the love that we're showing the land and the produce that we're getting from the land. Pickle garden is the same way. Or a pollinator garden. And these are some of my favorite gardens that we have here. I was actually sitting with a congregant a few days, about a week ago. We were sitting outside. We had scheduled our appointment a number of different times, happened to be sitting in our pollinator garden, and a hummingbird appeared. I've only seen hummingbirds once or twice or three times in my life. And there I was, because I happened to be randomly sitting with a congregant looking out at this pollinator garden, and there came a hummingbird. The pollinator garden is one of my ways of giving back to, as I'm growing produce, I also want to welcome the pollinators to our garden and create spaces for pollinators to be. We grow lots of Florida natives here on our campus. How do I create places where pollinators are able to find the nectar that they need? And also, when you have a pollinator, it is a great illustration of the value of a malach, of an angel, of a person who makes sacred connections between human and divine, or human and human. And there are countless stories that I know I tell and I've shared over and over again. One of my favorite, simplest ones is the Laura Buxton story that was told on Radiolab. If you look up Laura Buxton and Radiolab, young girl in England, she has a balloon. She puts her name and address on the balloon. It's a helium balloon. She releases it, goes up into the air. It comes down 100 miles away. A neighbor walks out, finds it, a person walks out, he finds it in his bush. He looks at it, he sees the label, he says, Laura Buxton, that's my neighbor. He goes over to Laura's mother. She's 11 years old. He says, Laura's balloon ended up in my bush. The mom looks at it, says, Laura, how can you do this? We don't leave our rubbish around. Laura looks at her mom, says, Mom, that's not my handwriting. It's not my address. This is another Laura Buxton. And the two of them the two Laura Buxtons end up having this amazing conversation. They're both 11 years old. They meet. They both have hamsters with the same spot on their tushies. They meet and have these incredible conversations. That, to me, is what these pollinators do and what we can do as malachim, as people who make sacred connections. The first Laura Buxton had the chutzpah to release the balloon. The neighbor saw it. Instead of throwing it away, he hands it to the second Laura's mother. The second Laura's mother, instead of throwing it away, hands it to her daughter. Her daughter takes a look at it and has the extra energy to say, wait a second, what's going on here? She then sends the note to the first Laura Buxton. All of these human connections because somebody meant that extra effort. That's what pollinators do for us. There are stories of Joseph meeting the angel that tells him that his brothers are in Dothan, and the whole Joseph story, Jacob. Over and over again, our tradition says, look for those moments of sacred connection, be part of those moments of sacred connection. And that's what I try to illustrate with all of my pollinator gardens. So these are just some of the different Jewish concept gardens. How can we create a garden that lives a Jewish value, that helps us create a Jewish artifact or tell a Jewish story? So I am curious, for some questions, but I am also excited to hear some of your ideas, some of your thoughts, some of your other different ponderings about different Jewish garden concepts. And so I am going to open it up to you all. Please turn on your cameras and join me with the chat. I'm happy for questions, but also again, to hear some of your brainstorms.
Rabbi, I was wondering, how many people work on that garden? Is it just you?
I have volunteers at all sorts of different times, but it is one of the challenges I have. I do live in an older community and it is humid a lot. It is hard sometimes for people to get out. This is kind of my hobby, so this is my stretch break, so I get out. And I've got 5 acres of campus here, but a lot of this is just small spaces and small areas. And so I do have some volunteer help. A lot of it is coming through my brainstorms and my labor. I do certainly involve folks that are not part of the congregation in the wider community at different points in time, and look for other ways to then get out into the wider community. We have a tree program that we are part of that is trying to plant 100,000 trees in the next 10 years. And so not only do I have projects here, but also going to the wider community.
Very much. I have a question about nitrogen fixing. You mentioned about fixing nitrogen in the garden to plant things, and we have some volunteer beans, pole beans. Should we just allow them to just disintegrate into the garden? Will beans fix nitrogen into a garden?
And I think the nitrogen happens with them growing. So as they grow, they're putting the nitrogen in. So you wait until you harvest them. Sorry, got a gnat coming up to join me. So you're harvesting, and when they're done harvesting, yes, you can then compost the plants in, but the nitrogen fixing, I'm pretty sure, happens as they're growing.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much.
And there's a whole discussion of cover crops and crop rotation that goes there too. I will also say I am I've been learning on my own and learning in community, but don't have any formal garden education. So if there are other garden people that have more formal garden education, please feel free to add to that. And I think, Corinne, you had a question?
I actually didn't have a question, but I have a comment. And my comment is that I absolutely love what you have just done, because I thoroughly believe that God is in nature. And when I'm in my garden, I feel like I'm close to God. And what you've just presented really, really talks to that. And we have to remember God made a garden for Adam and Eve. And he wanted them to live in it. But of course, eventually people destroy everything that God has created. So I think that we all need to be very aware and become more spiritual. And really, I thoroughly agree and love with what you said. I could sit under a tree and feel very close to God, or meditate outside. And I think that's what it's all about.
And these are just ways of bringing people into the garden as I'm doing Jewish experiences, and then bringing the Jewish experiences inside of the garden inside also.
And the other thing that I wanted to share with everybody is that surveys were done. Children who were never exposed to nature and to gardens and to all those things had significant educational differences to children who were exposed. And I think that it came about because children with a lot of children have been shown sometimes learning difficulties, etc. Often is because they've never been exposed to nature. It's a very important part of our lives.
And young people, if you take them to a garden that has things growing that they can eat, they will eat some of the most astounding things that they would never touch if their parent brought it into them in the home. And so that's part of the absolutely part of the fun of the garden. So I'm seeing Ginger is asking about starting a garden in Zone 9. I believe I'm in very much in Zone 9. And so Ginger, you are welcome to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you about that process, because it's both a big process and a small process. Because if you try to do all of it at once, there's no reason to be overwhelmed. My saying is, in one pot, you can do a lot. So, and so Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here in Michigan, and we're looking at starting we have a small space that we can do a small garden with. Struggling with getting people to commit to, being there year round or being on top of it. So I'm kind of leaning towards the sensory garden. So did you do all of these? How long do they take? What kind of budget, is required to get something going? We'd like to do a plan for our small space and then maybe expand that.
And so that is the key of starting small, finding one thing that you're going to do. The budgets vary because it really just depends on what you're trying to do and how to do it. One of the things we've actually started for our congregation as part of the tree project that I mentioned is a both and. So we had been doing the Jewish National Fund Buy a Tree in Israel. We've actually shifted, and we're doing both a local tree planting project, but also partnering with Kibbutz Lotan. And so people are making donations. Half of the donation is going to go either to our tree planting community project or to Kibbutz Lotan, and part of it is going to stay here for our sustainability and garden projects. And so it's a powerful way of doing that both and, as well as that's part of the creativity of it, of looking around and finding where to get the soil and the plants. That's where the big expenses are. And just finding if there are either community garden groups that you can partner with who has some of those different resources. And again, I'm happy to talk with different groups about what the garden design would be. Obviously, you need to talk to your local county extension or community garden groups. They know what to plant and when. But in terms of weaving Jewish ideas or Jewish value or story, I'm happy to do some of that brainstorming.
Thank you.
So, and Anne has a question.
Hi, I'm coming actually from Ottawa. So our area our growing season is even more restricted. So I'm just wanting to know, I'm really excited about this concept garden that you've created. And I'm wanting to know, you did the chicken soup preserved in jars. Do you have a communal kitchen or that you teach or preserve food in?
So right now I've actually taken over the social hall kitchen because no one's eating on our campus other than me. So we have garden kitchens on our campus. We have done cooking projects and cooking programs. And so sometimes, for the most part, when people do the cooking here, they're then taking stuff home. So if we make pickles, for example, or we make chicken soup, then people are taking it home or taking it to share with them. And so we're in this very strange state where some of the cooking and other projects we've been doing has been more me because of COVID-19 and not being able to have people on our campus, certainly not eating together on our campus. And so, yes, we're using communal kitchens. And let me actually answer that in a very different way. Last night, I was part of a pickling experience. Some of my cohort and friends from the Adamah group, we were all over the country. I've done tegelach, I've done pickling, we've made halva and challah. That's where this power of this virtual community is pretty amazing. You don't all have to be sitting in the same place in order to have some of these experiences. And so, yes, somebody is saying to reach out to the Master Garden, a volunteer Master Gardener, and your local county extension. I actually am part of that for here in my area. And did I answer that question?
Yes, you did. And I understand the reality of COVID. I appreciate your positive view that it's the power of the virtual community. Thank you. It does offer opportunities.
Well, and you're in Ottawa. We have had people at our Shabbat services and high holidays and various programs from Canada to California. And that's something that is very different from what we had before. And Judaism favors time over space. And what I mean by that is, if we can't gather in a space, the temple in Jerusalem, for example, our tradition says it's Sukkot, everybody around, Jews around the world, gather in your place and at the same time do Jewish ritual. That's what we're doing with these virtual spaces, that regardless of where we are, because we're able to use the internet in this way, we are able to gather at the same time and create a virtual space in order to have beautiful community together. And that's what we have to take advantage of and what we've been able to do with people learning these virtual platforms.
Certainly. And in terms of knowledge mobilization, it's incredible.
Rabbi, I had a couple of comments I wanted to make.
Yes, Deb.
Hi, thanks. So I'm speaking, I'm technically a master urban gardener, but I'm speaking more as the garden coordinator of a community space. People asked a couple of questions about starting their own gardens, and I think people who have never gardened before need to understand that the biggest challenge you will meet, and I know you're nodding, Rabbi, because you know this, is maintenance. So I have absolute faith that all of you could plant like the most beautiful, impressive garden, and it would be like fantastic for about 3 months, but then you're going to hit like August, September, October, and you're going to be like, oh my, this is a lot to maintain. And we see it all the time. So I would say if you're just getting started, like a container is fantastic, and don't feel bad about that. And then see what it is that you can realistically do. We lost the rabbi. Okay, and he's bringing the container. So here, Rabbi, you want to talk about your container?
What do these two things have in common? It's an etrog.
Okay.
And so this is Sukkot. And so we have an etrog and we have a lulav. This is actually what really started my crazy garden project. So, etrogim, they smell wonderful. They're citrus fruit. I live in Florida, in fact, in Indian River County. And if you have ever had a grapefruit, it might be an Indian River grapefruit that comes from here. I'm quite literally in the midst of what used to be a huge citrus area. It is changing now because of citrus screening and climate change. But this is an etrog. Last year, when we had, after Sukkot, I was actually doing a archaeology simulation with our religious school, and one of the stories that I had for it involved somebody finding the Etrog seeds and taking them, with the destruction of the land of Israel, taking them into diaspora. You can take an etrog, in addition, and I've never done this before, of candy, you can candy the peel, right? You can also take the seeds, and this is one of last year's etrog seeds. And so I have grown an etrog tree. I will tell you, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at their biblical garden, they have etrog trees, and they just put them in a greenhouse for the winter and then bring them out. And you can grow it in a container. We have gotten two etrogim from our etrog trees over the years here. I am never probably going to have an industry of being able to sell etrog trees or etrogim, but I always keep experimenting with it. And how awesome it is that I'm able to take this and again keep that cycle of growing, moving forward, and to see the look on our young people's and our adults' faces when you cut open an etrog. Some of them love to smell it, some of them love to taste it, and then to take the seeds and put them in soil and see them germinate and see them grow into the trees and plants. What does an etrog tree look like? Doing the same thing at Pesach. And this was something from a community up in Maine, in Portland, Maine, that they grew wheat. And so I've always been wondering, how much wheat does it make to make a slice of bread? And so I got some wheat and I started to grow it. The squirrels got my wheat, but I keep experimenting and playing with it. But you can thresh and you can get decorative wheat. You can thresh it, you can winnow it, you can grind it, you can then make matzah with it. You can then take some of the wheat and you can grow it. So many of us don't know what wheat looks like when it's growing or what it takes to thresh and winnow it. When you do some of these things, whether it's pressing olives, whether it's threshing and winnowing wheat and grinding wheat, when we do those things that are part of the that partnership between God and humanity of taking the produce and turning it into one of these other forms that we're able to eat, you get a different appreciation for your food. And if you've ever threshed and winnowed and ground your wheat before, you get a very different, if you're a challah maker or a sour, you get a very different, every time you scoop a cup of flour out to add it to your dough mixture, you get a very different appreciation for how much labor it took to get to that 1 cup of flour you just used. Yes, etrog hooch. That's always a good one. I'll have to get that recipe. Other questions, other thoughts, other Jewish concept gardens that you might brainstorm?
Someone had mentioned in the comments a Havdalah garden potentially, or a Pesach garden. Wondering what you're thinking about those things.
So I have grand plans for Havdalah gardens. I have my 5 senses garden, which in part was we used for Havdalah. So one of the things we have is different herbs that are growing there. I've had this crazy idea that I also want to grow flax, so I could use the flax and or the cotton for wicks. And then a couple of years ago, I was able to obtain a lot of beeswax and honeycomb, because for Rosh Hashanah, we were talking about mead. I think Willow was on here. I know Willow was talking about mead to our Adamah group. We were talking about mead. We were talking about bees. That idea of, can bees teach us about, and pollinators teaching us about a community? And as a community, how can we make sure we take care of the bees? My grand scheme would be to be able to take the wax, to be able to render it, to be able to then make Havdalah candles, to be growing what I need to make wicks in the in the Havdalah garden. Actually, I was at my house. We have a wild native grape called the muscadine or muscadine. Happened to notice there were grapes on the vines at my house. I grabbed some of those grapes, and I now have grapevines started. And so who knows, in a few years, then I might be able to have all of what I need to for Havdalah growing in my garden. As I say that, and all of these incredible dreams, and Neshama Karlbach was talking about faith and belief and dreams, even if I just get the tiniest bit of wax, even if I get one grape, even if I just get a few herbs, that idea of saying to a community, to a group, to your family, what are we consuming when we do Havdalah? And is there a way we can produce a little bit of this on our own to appreciate what we're consuming? That's that value of this experience for me. And I've actually now found a local beekeeper that I might be able to get some wax from. So Richard and anybody from my community, watch out, it's coming. And we're coming to the end of our time. Is there anyone else, any other thoughts, questions? I know I chatted my email address. If people are interested in being in contact with me, please reach out. Happy to brainstorm with you, share some of the different lessons and resources that I created, but also just what does one of these different Jewish gardens look like? Thank you all for joining me for this.